Amongst the dinim of the korban chatos in our parsha, the Torah says, "Uklicheres asher tevushal boy." If you have an earthenware vessel that the korban chatos was cooked in, yishaver, it needs to be broken. The imbikli nechoishes bushala, if it was cooked in a copper keli vessel, umoyrag v'shutav b'moyim, it needs to be scoured and rinsed in water. Rashi quotes the word yishaver, that it needs to be broken, and explains, Lefisha bliyash and ivlaz boy, because that what was absorbed from the korban, from the chatos, into the pot, into the walls of the pot, becomes noisar. Noisar, as we know, is that the korban has a certain amount of time, how much it can be eaten for, and afterwards it's considered noisar. Usually that would have to be burnt. But here, what Rashi is saying is that the meat that went into the pot became noisar. That's why it's going to need to be broken. Then Rashi continues and says, the same thing really applies to all korbanis, meaning not only the korban chatos. Says the Rebbe, the fact that Rashi needs to explain the reason why it needs to be broken, as well as to add that this is going to apply to all other korbanis as well, says the Rebbe, we can understand this very simply. And that is because just before our pasuk about the earthenware vessel, we have the previous pasuk speaks about the blood of the korban chatos, that if it sprinkles, it sprays onto a garment, you need to wash it. You need to wash that garment in a holy place. Now that obligation is only regards to the korban chatos. It does not apply to other korbanos. So we would have thought that since our pasuk licheres about the earthenware vessel that the meat was cooked in is coming right in continuation to that pasuk, so we would have thought that maybe here too it's only a special din in regards to the cooking of a korban chatos, that because of the stringency of a korban chatos, so there is an obligation to immediately remove anything that was absorbed in the keli, just like we need to remove the blood that sprayed onto the beged. This is what we would have thought, that's why the Torah is telling us that an earthenware vessel, since you're not going to be able to get out that which was absorbed, and Rashi is going to tell us in the further Rashi, which we'll discuss soon, that what was absorbed in the earthenware vessel can never really come out. This is why the Torah is telling us that it needs to be broken. This is all what we could have thought. So Rashi is negating this by saying that no, that this din of it being broken is not connected with the special stringency of a korban chatos, but rather it's to do with a din of noisar. In other words, since something was absorbed in the keli, and that becomes noisar, and if that's the case, this would apply to all korbanis as well, because all korbanis have this din called noisar. Not like the blood of the korban chatos in the previous pasuk, which is something unique to the korban chatos. Says the Rebbe, however, this itself we need to understand. What is forcing Rashi in Pshutei Shel Mikra to say that the reason to break this earthenware vessel is because of the prohibition of noisar, and therefore it would apply to any other korban as well, not only to a korban chatos? Why doesn't Rashi learn, as it seems to be implied by the simple flow of the psukim, that this is a special, unique din in regards to korban chatos, just like the previous din about the blood of the korban chatos that sprayed onto a garment? On the contrary, says the Rebbe, it seems to be difficult to learn al derech hapshat that the breaking of the vessel is because of noisar. For two reasons, says the Rebbe. Number one, it's seemingly hard to say that which was absorbed into the pot should have the same properties of noisar, should be considered noisar. Because usually noisar, the way we understand noisar, is if there's something left over from that which you have previously eaten. In other words, you have something of substance that you can eat, and there's some substance left over, now that's going to be noisar. Whereas that which was absorbed in the keli, which is totally not begeder, not in the realm of being able to be eaten, seemingly you would think it also doesn't have the din of noisar, that it's left over of a food, it's not considered food. Point number two, says the Rebbe, if in fact the reason why it needs to be broken is because of the isser of noisar, then it would mean that when do you need to break it? There's a very particular time. It's not right after it was cooked. It's only after the time that you're not allowed to eat the korban anymore. That's when it becomes noisar. So then seemingly the Torah should have told us when we need to break it. Just like the Torah tells us in regards to the isser of noisar, when it applies, when you're not allowed to eat the meat of the korban anymore, when it's considered noisar. The Rebbe now moves on further in Rashi. Rashi then goes on and quotes the word of the pasuk umoyrak, and translates it that it's in the word tamrukei hanoshim. This is a pasuk in Megillas Esther. The cosmetics of the women. Rashi gives a French word, ashkurir belaz. In other words, something that polishes, shines, cleanses. Then Rashi quotes the words umoyrak v'shutaf from the pasuk, and he explains lifloit es bliosi. This is all speaking about the copper keli now. that this is to get out that which was absorbed in the keli. That's why it needs to be scoured and rinsed. And then Rashi says, Aval, but however, klicheres, an earthenware vessel, the Torah is teaching you over here that it will never get rid of that which it had absorbed. So the Rebbe says, seemingly, it's not understood. Number one, says the Rebbe, this pirush, anu moirak v'shutav, that you're trying to get rid of that which was absorbed in the keli, and by the earthenware vessel you can do that. This is a direct continuation to the first thing Rashi had said on the word yishaver, that because there was something absorbed in the keli, it became noisar, and that's why it needs to be broken. So Rashi seemingly should have put these two Rashis together and not interrupt in the middle with the translation of the word umayrak, which he could have very easily said after finishing explaining the idea of the scouring and rinsing. And we find this a number of times in Rashi, that he'll first explain the general idea, and then he'll go back and explain the meaning of the word. The Rebbe says, furthermore, it's not understood of how Rashi actually explains when Rashi says, umoirak v'shutaf, that it needs to be scoured and rinsed. So the Rebbe says, the question over here is as follows. From the fact that Rashi concludes and says, avol klicheres, as opposed to the copper vessel. However, says Rashi, in contrast to that, the earthenware vessel, the Torah is teaching you here that it will never get rid of that which it had absorbed. It seems to be implying that from the first part of the pasuk, where the pasuk clearly said that the earthenware vessel needs to be broken, from there you wouldn't have known this idea that it can never get rid of that which it absorbed. We're learning it over here from the copper keli that you're going to scour and you're going to rinse in order to get rid of that which it absorbed. From this we learn that by the earthenware vessel, that wouldn't have helped. You can't get rid of what it absorbed. So the Rebbe says this seems to be very surprising. Why do we need it? Why can't we learn it from the fact that the pasuk said Yishavar, that the earthenware vessel needs to be broken? Since as Rashi himself said, the reason it needs to be broken is because of that which was absorbed in it. Isn't that a proof that there's no way for that which was absorbed in it to get rid of it? We should get rid of it completely by an earthenware vessel. So why do we need to learn it from the fact that the copper keli could be washed and scoured? Because, says the Rebbe, if in fact by the earthenware vessel there would have been a way that we could get rid of that which it absorbed, then we shouldn't be breaking it. On the contrary, by breaking it, we're not getting rid of it completely because it's always going to remain in the pieces, in the broken pieces of the earthenware vessel. As opposed to if you could have gotten rid of it somewhere, taken it out completely, then you would have gotten rid of it completely. So seemingly from the fact that we told already that the earthenware vessel needs to be broken to get rid of that which was absorbed in it, so that seems to be telling us clearly that there's no other way for it to come out. Says the Rebbe, the explanation is, we're going back to the pasuk that's before our pasuk, which part of it we mentioned already before. In the previous pasuk, the Torah tells us two very different kinds of dinim. One in connection to the meat of the korban chatos. The Torah says, anything that touches the meat becomes holy. What does this mean? So Rashi says, any food that touches the meat of the korban chatos and absorbs some of that, some of the flavor, the meat, the taste of the korban chatos, since the meat was now absorbed into this other food, the flavor of the meat was now absorbed into the other food, so the din is, as Rashi explains, yiktosh. What does it mean it becomes holy? It gets the same properties of the korban chatos. So if the korban chatos was pasul, this meat is now going to be considered pasul. If the korban chatos is kosher, but it has certain halachas, certain stringencies, when you're allowed to eat it, etc. So this other piece of food is also now going to get those same properties as the korban chatos. So that's one thing the pasuk says. Then the pasuk tells us another din, which we mentioned earlier already, regarding the blood of the korban chatos, that if anything sprinkles of it onto a garment, you have to wash it in a holy place. Now here, the Torah is specifically saying that we're not speaking about it in the same way like by the meat, that two things got mixed together completely. One thing was absorbed and got mixed together completely. We're saying some of the blood sprinkled onto the garment. So it's not like the whole garment is now mixed with blood. Nevertheless, the Torah is telling us that since this garment has the blood of a korban chatos, this blood needs to be taken out, it needs to be washed. But what has to be washed? It's not that the whole garment has to be washed. As Rashi says, only the place that got some of the blood. So we have these two different dinim. Again, food that absorbs from other food, or blood that's sprinkled onto a garment. Says the Rebbe, therefore, when it comes to our pasuk, when we say that an earthenware vessel that the korban chatos was cooked in. So what's happening in our case? That is, that the meat of the carbon chatos was absorbed into the vessel, into the pot, as a result of cooking. Says the Rebbe, it makes sense to say that this is very similar to which case of the previous pasuk, not the case of the blood that's sprinkled onto a garment, but rather it seems to be much more similar to the foods that absorbed part of the carbon chatos flavor of meat. In other words, in the previous pasuk we spoke about how it's possible that other food could have absorbed some of the meat of the carbon chatos, and then we're speaking about how a certain vessel absorbed the meat of the carbon chatos. Says the Rebbe, this is why Rashi learns that the reason why the earthenware vessel needs to be broken is not similar to the idea of the blood, that is because of the stringency of the carbon chatos, but rather it's because of the Isser of Noiser. Because then these two dinim, again, food that touched the meat of the carbon chatos, or an earthenware vessel that it was cooked in, are then basically very, very similar ideas. They're the same geder. That is, just like the din of anything that touches the food, a food that touches the meat of the carbon chatos becomes holy, is not a gzeiros hakosov. It's not some sort of decree of the Torah just because of the stringency of the carbon chatos. Rather, this idea that something that touches something else and absorbs some of it gets the same properties and the same qualities, we find this earlier in regards to carbon mincha as well. The pasuk says anything that touches it becomes holy, as Rashi explains over there. If it's kachim kalim, which is a carbon of a lesser kedusha, or chulin, just ordinary food, touch it and absorb some of it, they become holy. They get the same stringencies or the same properties as the carbon mincha. So the Rebbe says that, in other words, this is an inyan shebesvar. It's a logical thing that the blia, that which was absorbed, the flavor of the meat, is affecting the thing that it went into, and that's why it becomes exactly the same as it. So just like we say it in regards to foods, in the same thing that we're going to say now in regards to being absorbed in the earthenware vessel, that it's not a gzeiros hakosov because of the stringency of a carbon chatos, but rather this is a svara, which, as we said, applies to all carbonos, that because it was absorbed into the keli, so therefore now it becomes noiser. Inside the keli, you have this noiser right now. Says that based on this will also explain to us why we cannot learn from the word yishaver, from the fact that it needs to be broken, that an earthenware vessel can never lose that which was absorbed in it. As we said, Rashi learns it out specifically when contrasting it to the klei nechoshes, rather from the words of that the klei cheres has to be broken, even though, yes, it's true that the reason it's being broken is because that which was absorbed in it. But the Rebbe says that still doesn't tell us that you wouldn't be able to get rid of that which was absorbed in it. Why not? Says the Rebbe, since this din of the fact that the earthenware vessel needs to be broken is coming in continuation, as we said before, to that din of the meat of the carbon chatos that touched other food, and now the other food gets the same din of the carbon chatos. So because of this, the yishaver, the fact that the earthenware vessel needs to be broken in our case, is going to be a very similar idea. That is, just like when food absorbs the carbon chatos, it becomes just like the carbon chatos. In other words, the dinim of the meat that was absorbed are carried over into this new food. Says the Rebbe exactly the same thing as with this pot that absorbed some of the meat of the carbon chatos. This din of yishaver is not because, it's not only because of the particular bit of meat that's inside of it right now. It's saying that the whole keli sort of got this din right now. In other words, since this keli absorbed noiser, the whole keli sort of now got a din similar to noiser. It needs to be burnt, or in our case, broken. It's almost like saying the keli became noiser. Again, just to clarify, it's not only a matter that there's some forbidden meat in it right now, and the only issue is we need to get rid of that meat. And then there becomes a question, could we get rid of it? Could we not get rid of it? We're saying something else. We're saying once it went into the keli, in our particular case in the klicheres, it's almost like saying the keli itself became like noiser. And therefore, if just for this din of yishaver, if we weren't contrasting it with the klei nechoshes, just from our din that it needs to be broken, it wouldn't tell us that it could never leave. That which was absorbed could never leave. Because even if you would have been able to get rid of it through the special kashering processes like haga'olah with boiling hot water, etc., etc., even if you would be able to theoretically, there would still be an obligation to break it because of the isur that went into it, caused it that it became, so to speak, as holy, or the same din like the original thing that went into it, became like the korban chatos itself. Again, just like food that touched a korban chatos, that food gets the whole stringency of the korban chatos, this keli now is getting the full dinim of a korban chatos, and therefore would have the dinim of noiser. So again, just from the fact that it needs to be broken, we still wouldn't know that you can't get rid of that which is in the walls of the pot. Only once we start contrasting it with the clean choishes with the copper keli, there it could be scoured and rinsed, and it would be enough just to get rid of that which was absorbed in it. And there's no chiyuv, there's no obligation to destroy the keli. And by kli cheres, we say, by the earthenware vessel, we said clearly you did have to break it. From this we could learn that by kli cheres, obviously you can't get rid of that which was inside of it. And that's why Rashi says over here, once the Torah is telling us about the kli nechoishes, about the copper keli, that you could scour it, rinse it, and then you get rid of it, that's telling you about the kli cheres, obviously you couldn't do that. Says the Rebbe, but what's still not understood is, since by kli nechoishes it also absorbed this isur of noisar, so then why don't we say the same idea, that it should have been broken? The keli needs to be broken, even if it got rid of that which was absorbed in the keli, just like we have said regarding to kli cheres. And if that's the case, seemingly you should be able to go back now and say that the reason why the kli cheres needs to be broken is not a special din on the keli itself, as we were trying to say, but rather maybe it is because of what was absorbed in the keli. And it's just that by a kli cheres you can't get rid of it, and that's why you have to break it. Says the Rebbe, this is why Rashi interrupts the two pirushim, the first one about yishaver, and then about scouring and rinsing. In other words, the first one that's dealing directly with the kli cheres, the second one with the kli nechoishes, he interrupts it with the word umoirak, to translate umoirak, and he says lashon tamruke hanoshim, which means, as Rashi himself says in Megillas Esther, that these are things hametzachtzichin, that polish, that shine. Rashi is trying to bring out that the din of umoirak, that this din in the second part of the pasuk that we're dealing with the copper kalim, is actually similar, not like we just said about the earthenware vessel, that it's going to be more similar to food touching food. Rashi wants to explain to us that the second part of the pasuk, the copper keli, which we're going to scour and polish, and scour and rinse, is going to be more similar to the other din of the previous pasuk, like the fact that we need to wash the blood of the korban chatos. In other words, the two dinim in our pasuk, the earthenware vessel that needs to be broken, the copper vessel that could be scoured and rinsed, are similar to the two dinim of the previous pasuk. The pasuk of food touching the meat of the korban chatos, and the pasuk of the blood going onto a garment. That is, the din of an earthenware vessel in our pasuk, from which we say that which it absorbed cannot come out, is going to be similar to meat touching or food touching the meat of the korban chatos, that absorbed from the korban chatos. That since you cannot take out from the food that which it had absorbed from the meat of the holy meat from the korban chatos, that's why it becomes holy. It gets the same level of holiness as the korban chatos. Similar is what we say regarding the earthenware vessel, that it becomes similar to the meat that had gone into it. In other words, so it's going to be noisar, and therefore the keli itself has to be broken. Then there is the second part of the pasuk, which speaks about a copper keli, which you could get rid of what was absorbed in the keli. So this is going to be more similar to the other din of blood being sprinkled onto a garment. And since you could get rid of the blood out of the garment, so here the din is not that the garment becomes the same holy as the blood or the korban chatos, but rather it needs to be washed. And similarly, in our case, since the copper keli, you could get rid of that which was absorbed in the keli, so therefore there's no obligation of burning it or breaking it and breaking the noiser in it. Rather, all you need to do is take out what was absorbed in the keli. Says the Rebbe, based on this, that umoirak v'shutaf, that the fact that this copper keli needs to be rinsed and scoured is similar to the washing of the blood of the korban chatos off a garment, says the Rebbe, we can take it a step further. That by the fact that Rashi interrupts between the two pirushim with translating the word umoirak v'shutaf, with the word moirak, he's coming to tell us that the din of scouring or rinsing is actually different, very different to the din of the earthenware vessel being broken. In other words, we may have thought that they're both basically achieving the same idea. We want to get rid of the noiser. But by the earthenware vessel, since you can't get rid of it, you can't get rid of that which was absorbed, so you need to break the keli. And by the copper keli, you could scour it and rinse it. Says the Rebbe, no. Rashi is coming to tell us that we're actually speaking about two very different gedorim. They have two very different, they're very different to each other in nature. That is, just like the din of the rinsing, the washing of the blood of the karban chatos is nothing to do with any sort of isur, any sort of prohibition of the blood, or anything that's possible about the blood. Rather, there's a special chiddush in the Torah, that the Torah tells us about the blood of the karban chatos, that if it sprays onto a beged, there's an obligation to wash it. In a similar way is in regards to the copper keli, that a karban chatos was cooked in. There's an obligation that we need to scour it and rinse it to get rid of that which it had absorbed, but it has nothing to do with the isur of noiser, of that which was absorbed in the keli. In other words, different to the earthenware vessel that was cooked in. But rather, there's a special din because of the fact that it has chatos inside of it, as we'll soon discuss more. And again, the earthenware vessel is going to be very different. That's specifically because of noiser, as will be discussed. The Rebbe says this will also help us understand a certain change over here, a certain difference. And that is, by the din of gi'ulei nochrim, that is, pots and vessels that were used by goyim, which need to be kashered, the pasuk says, "Kol davar asher yavei bo'esh," anything that was used directly with fire. The pot was like a spit or other types of cooking utensils that are used directly with fire. Ta'aviru bo'esh, you need to pass through fire in order to kasher it. Rashi tells us over there in that pasuk, this is a pasuk in Parshas Matos, Rashi says that the same way it was used originally, that's the same way you're going to get rid of that which was absorbed in it. So something that was used in boiling hot water, the way you kasher it is going to be, you're going to get rid of that which it absorbed in boiling hot water. Here, however, we have this expression, u'moirak v'shutav b'mayim. Why the difference? Says the Rebbe, because by the hag'ala, when we're trying to purge something from the isur that was inside of it, the main thing we're trying to get rid of is that bit of isur that's inside of it. And therefore it's going to be enough to use boiling hot water. Whereas in our din of moirak v'shutav by the karban chatos, that's more related to the special halacha and special stringency of the blood of the karban chatos, which we said before, like washing the beged. And in other words, this is a special kind of din. It's not just we want to get rid of it. And therefore, just the hagala, just the boiling hot water, which is going to get rid of that which went inside, is not going to be enough. That's only going to get rid of what was inside. But nevertheless, there has to be a special din over here. Moirak v'shutav b'mayim, it needs to be scoured and rinsed. You have to wash out and deal with this keli, rub it and scrub it and wash it, similar to the kibbutz, similar to the rinsing and the washing. This is what we have to do with the copper keli, similar to the washing of the beged. How do we understand this? What is the difference between these two different dinim? Says the Rebbe, we're going to go back first to the questions we had originally in the Sicha. How could you even use this word noisor regarding something that was absorbed in the keli? It seems to be so, there's no substance to it. It's not edible. And number two, why doesn't the Torah tell us when it needs to be burnt or broken? Says the Rebbe, Rashi is actually preempting all of this with his careful wording where he says, Lefi sha'bliya shenivlaz, by that which was absorbed in it, Naas and noiser became noiser. What's Rashi saying? He's not saying it's going to become noiser at a certain time. The meat's in the pot, and then eventually at a certain point it's going to become noiser. What Rashi is saying is by the actual fact that it got absorbed into the earthenware vessel, it immediately becomes noiser. How do we understand this? Says the Rebbe, the gather of noiser simply is not that eating it after a particular time is now becoming transformed and changed into a din of noiser. Rather, it becomes noiser when it becomes impossible to eat it. That means, by the meat of a korban, the Torah gave us two obligations, or gave us conditions about two obligations. The main obligation, obviously, first and foremost, is to eat it, as long as you can eat it. If you're not going to be able to eat it, then you're not allowed to just leave it around. We have to burn it immediately. Says the Rebbe, that's the explanation of what's happening in our case when it's being absorbed in the pot. By the actual fact that the flavor, the taste of the meat got absorbed into the walls of the pot, and it's no longer food, then immediately right now it became noisar, and therefore you have to get rid of it, you have to burn it. And therefore the din is that by the earthenware vessel that it's cooked, it needs to be broken. In other words, immediately there's an obligation of burning the noisar, which in an earthenware vessel, practically what that's going to mean is that you're going to have to break the vessel. Says the Rebbe, here we see how Rashi, with his careful wording, is preempting a whole larichos dika shaklavataria in the commentators, in the Mefarshim. Rabbi Eliyahu Mizrahi asks on Rashi, why is it that you need to break the klicheres because of that which was absorbed becomes noisar? Because the question is, there's an opinion that says that just by the fact that it was overnight in a pot, already it makes it that's going to have a bad taste. And that's Rashi actually learns that way. So the question then is, if one night already causes it to lose to have a bad taste and it becomes already spoiled, etc. So by the time it should become noisar, so then it's what's called noisan tam b'gam. It's going to give a foul taste. It's actually going to give a bad taste. So therefore, it's not even a davar osar. It's not even noisar. And there's other questions that the Mefarshim ask. But the Rebbe says, according to what we just explained, there's no question at all. Because according to Rashi in his Pirush al HaTorah, which is explained in Pshut Shal Mikra, the moment it went into the pot, into the walls of the pot, immediately becomes noisar, and therefore immediately there's an obligation to burn it. Says the Rebbe, based on all of this, we're now going to understand the difference between earthenware vessels and clay nechoshes and copper vessels. This idea that the moment it goes into the walls of the pot, it becomes noisar, says the Rebbe, this is only going to be true in regards to earthenware vessels, where it's impossible that which is going to be absorbed is ever going to be eaten in any way whatsoever, and therefore it's going to be noisar. And that's why it has to be broken. It's broken as a din of burning noisar. As Rashi says, because that which was absorbed in it became noisar. Whereas by the copper keli, where that which was absorbed in it could come out, so then when it goes into the keli, into the walls of the pot, it doesn't become noisar, because it's not necessarily going to stay there forever. It still could come out. It could still be eaten. For example, you could cook something else in the pot, and now that which was absorbed in the pot is going to come back out into the food and be eaten together with the new food. So if that's the case, then by a copper keli, why does it need to be scoured and rinsed? It's not in order to get out any isur, the prohibition of noisar. It's because of this other reason that we said before. We want to clean the keli from the flavor or from the meat of the carbon chatos, similar to the fact that a garment has to be washed if the blood of the chatos was sprinkled on it. Says the Rebbe, now we can understand the flow within Rashi. First, Rashi is explaining how by a clean choishes, by a copper keli, there's an obligation to scour it, and we said it's from the word tamruke anoshim, you need to rub it and scrub it, etc. Similar to the din of washing the blood off a garment. And that is the idea of getting rid of or taking out that which was absorbed in it. It's an idea of washing it. It's not the idea of burning noisar like by the klicheres. But in order to clarify this difference even more, that by klina chayshes, by a copper keli, there is no din of noisar because that which was absorbed in it, as it is in the case of an earthenware vessel. Rashi continues and it's contrasted and it says, but the earthenware vessel, here the Torah is teaching you that it will never come out. And that's why, by the fact that it goes into the keli, automatically it becomes noisar right away. Says the Rebbe, from here we could also take out something very fascinating in the area of halacha. The Rebbe says, first by prefacing, in regards to this din, that an earthenware vessel that had the meat carbon chatos cooked in it needs to be broken. A copper keli just needs to be scoured and rinsed. We have a machloikas between the Rambam and the Raavad. According to the Rambam, this din of the earthenware vessel needing to be broken, it's a gzeiras hakosov only by the carbon chatos. Whereas the scouring and the rinsing of the other types of kelim applies to all karbonos. The Raavad holds both dinim, both in regards to the fact that the earthenware vessel needs to be broken and that other kelim could be rinsed and scoured, both apply to all karbonos. What is Rashi's opinion? Well, by breaking the vessel, the earthenware vessel, Rashi said, "V'hu adin l'chol hakachim." This would apply to all karbonis as well, because as we said, it's to do with noiser. Whereas the fact that it needs to be scoured and rinsed with water, Rashi doesn't say that. Now, simply, people learn that it means both dinims coming in one flow, and therefore Rashi doesn't have to repeat himself. Yes, it would also apply to other karbonis. But based on what we just explained, that it's because of the stringency of the carbon chatos that the klei nechoshis needs to be scoured. So it's very specific what Rashi is saying. And Rashi in Al Derech HaPshat is learning different to the Rambam and different to the Raavad. This is a third opinion. That the din of breaking that comes because of noisar, that would apply to all karbonos. Whereas the din of the special scouring or rinsing, according to Rashi, Mshud Shol Mikra, is more similar to the rinsing or washing of the blood on the garments from the carbon chatos, is a special stringency by the chatos, and not because of the din of noiser.